Welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast, where your host, Josh Sweeney, will give you, the business leaders, HR professionals, and company culture aficionados, the knowledge you need to take your company culture to the next level.
Hello, my name is Josh Sweeney, and welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast. This is season 2, where we talk all about hiring, and I am joined with my co-host, Annelle Barnett.
Hello, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
All right, so today's topic is hiring for skill, but firing for culture. So what are we talking about here? Hiring for skill, but firing for culture. Well, what happens most often is people will get a resume in. They'll do some skills-based matching on that resume and see if they're a good fit, bring them in for interview processes or the interview process. So they'll get that going.
Right.
And when they get that going, they're looking at the skills of that person. The challenge we have is when we look at why a lot of people are let go, fired, freed, whatever you want to call it, they're often let go for a culture match. It's not that I had a marketer that wasn't that good at social media management and I'm like, they're not good at using Hootsuite, so I'm going to fire them.
Right, yes.
It's usually that there's some sort of culture mismatch in the way that they work. They don't show up on time. Their work's not thorough. It's some other smaller item. So how do we get to the bottom of that? How do we get to the bottom of that in the interview process? What are some ways that you're seeing people, digging into the skills side, what are some of the flaws in the skills-based hiring that are causing people to hire for skill but fire for culture?
Well, I think that there are a lot of people that can check every box in the skill sets from a skill set perspective, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the most aligned for the position. Often when I'm hiring or working to hire people for my clients, I really like to get to know my clients. So there have been situations where I've gone to lunch with the entire team, or I've gone and met with each individual on the team so that I really understand what the culture of the organization is. And so I can use that information and use my awareness of the types of individuals and the types of culture that they have in order to determine if the person that I'm interviewing matches that culture.
And what are the different styles that you normally see? So if you go to lunch with somebody, it's kind of A or B, like they're super expressive and collaborative, or they're a little quiet. Like, what are the different ways that you gauge that?
Well, there are situations, where potentially in a startup, and it's kind of a fly by the seat of your pants, not parents, fly by the seat of your pants kind of culture and environment where everyone's just trying to get everything done every day. Now, if somebody came from an organization like Coca-Cola or Chick-fil-A or a larger Fortune type of company that has lots of processes and lots of documented standard operating procedures, then they're going to really struggle probably in the fly by the seat of your pants startup kind of environment. So I'm often feeling for that kind of situation and whether that person is going to be driven crazy by the organization or whether they will thrive in that kind of organization because they really like change and they like for things to move fast and like for the challenge of that kind of environment.
Yeah, I know in the startup world, there's lots of pivots, right? There's lots of lessons learned and epiphanies that happen. You're meeting with clients and you're doing customer discovery and all kinds of things like that. And, one day you could have been basically as a marketer, you could have been working on something for a week or a month and then realize, well, I got to dump this and go a different direction.
Right.
That's pretty challenging for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, if you simply ask the question of what's your work style, what type of environment do you enjoy working in, then you'll often find out if they're gonna love that kind of environment or they're gonna hate it. And I mean it can truly be one or the other if it doesn't align with who that individual is.
Yeah, I know we look at two different factors during our hiring process. So one of them is actually a question where we ask them what type of work environment they're looking for.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes that's telling, sometimes it's not. And then we also look at their resume as to what types of roles they've been in and where they were at. So what we found is the combination of the two is a great filter in that if they type in what type of work environment they want, we've actually had people that are like, oh, I like large companies, big environments, and all of these things that are not us.
Right.
And so we're able to filter them out. You know,
Right.
and that begs the question for me of why they applied for the job, because they, maybe they didn't look us up or do the due
Right.
diligence early
Yeah.
enough, because they'd figure out we're not an enterprise company by our size. And then we also look at the resume, because what we generally find is people that are working in enterprise environments are used to that support system. They're used to having the
Right.
name. The speed at which things change is a little bit slower. Like
Right.
they have to be more methodical on that. And, that's just a mismatch in our organization. So we could hire them because they have the skills for what we need.
Right.
But they're eventually going to be let go. And we've actually had to unfortunately let go of people in the past, in my past organization, where we found out they were really used to a different speed, a different set of infrastructure around them,
Right.
and all kinds of other attributes that we didn't have.
Yeah. And I mean, often the candidate doesn't even know that this environment won't work well for them. So they provide answers to questions because they're potentially open to different scenarios and opportunities. But as the hiring manager or as a recruiter, it's kind of our job to understand whether they're really going to be the right fit for both them and for the company, because our job is to match the people, the people with the role. And so if one side or the other side it turns out to not work, then our job wasn't done. So the individual it's interesting because a candidate's always going to have a different answer based on at what point in the interview or what point in the process that they're asked the question. So if they're asked that question, like you said, what type of work environment do you like? And they give you the big company answer, but then they interview for a small company, then their answer may change for that kind of scenario. So it's our job to understand really where the truth is, I guess, between those two answers.
And we definitely, we back that up by looking at the resume. The resume tells
Right.
the tale, right?
Right.
These are the companies they work for. These are the size. These are the types.
Right.
So that's in a lot of ways what they've gotten used to in some respects. And I know it can be a culture shock either way. If you've worked for enterprise companies and for 5-10 years and you go into a startup, it's going to be a culture shock, and vice versa.
Right.
If you've worked for startups for 5 or 10 years and then you go into a Fortune 100 or an enterprise, it's going to be a totally different ball game, and that's going to be a big mismatch. And I like what you said about some people just don't know. Right? They've worked in those environments for a long period of time, and they're like, well, I did it here, why can't I go do it there?
Right.
And until they actually do it, they discover a lot of the challenges that come about in making that switch.
Yeah, I am an example of this because in one of my roles earlier on in my career, I shifted from an all domestic marketing company to an international company. And of course, in the interview, they asked if I had international experience, and I said no, I wouldn't lie. But my, follow-up was that marketing's the same everywhere.
Right. I got this.
Right. I can figure this out. This is fine. This is not a big deal. But it turns out it is actually very different. And it's very different both culturally and the way that you approach the tactics and the strategy of marketing. And so I very quickly learned that there is a big difference. But, in the interview process, my perception was that there really isn't a difference. But it turns out that there is. So,
Gotcha. What other places have you seen that there was a major difference? So we talked about kind of startup versus enterprise, local versus international. Are there any other areas that you can think of that have been a pretty big difference in the way that things operate from a marketing sense?
I think anything that might be like a very sales-driven organization versus a very marketing-driven organization. There are different types of companies that sales really is the primary thing, and marketing is totally an enablement vehicle for sales. And then there are other companies where marketing is the primary go-to-market strategy. And so if you've worked in primarily driven marketing organization, and then you move to primarily sales-driven organization, then that's definitely going to be a struggle for that individual. And they may not realize that until they get in there. So again, it's my job as a recruiter and as the matchmaker to make sure that they actually understand what that kind of environment is and see if that is going to align for them or not.
Got it. Yeah, so there's lots of different questions that go into making sure that that person's a fit for the role to ensure that you're hiring the right person. You're not going to have to fire them later based on some sort of mismatch.
Right, exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we would like for you to think about the questions you're asking. What is the culture of your organization? What's the culture of your marketing organization? Is it sales driven or marketing driven? And how that impacts how you hire and whether you're hiring for skill and firing for culture, or if you're retaining the best talent you possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Epic Company Culture Podcast with Josh Sweeney. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. For additional content and transcripts, visit epicculture.co. If you have questions or topics you would like us to address or expand on, tweet us at epicculture1 or email at podcast@epicculture.co.